Hello, welcome to Frontiers with Bill. So anyway, this here is my inspiration in life. The entire reason why I'm into everything I'm into. The Frontier chainsaws, all the bigger chainsaws, the Fordson Dexter tractors, the garden tractors, the whole 9 yards.
Dodge trucks.
So anyway, both my parents worked the Frontier plant, which eventually became Pioneer Partner and then Pool and Weed Eater. So I'm just going to get my father here, Johnny the Junk Man,
I suppose,
to give you a little rundown on how he wound up getting the job there to start with.
Do you want me to talk now?
Yeah.
Okay, I was out in BC working as a cement layer, and the cold freezing rain was coming down between the mountains down through the valley, and I said, this is no good. It's not for a human being to put up with this cold and wet. So I come back to Ontario, and they were looking for a worker, a welder at Don Easton Trailers or the chainsaw factory. t.m.l it was called, I think. So I went to the boss, Matt Berg, and I said, well, I'm looking for a job. It's either here or Don Easton, but I don't want to work for very long. So he says, well, can you weld? What can you do? I says, I can do just about anything. So he says, do you think you could build a paint line? I says, well, show me what it is and I'll tell you. So he showed me what he wanted, and I said, yeah, it'll take me about 2 weeks, and when I get that done, you got to lay me off. He says, okay. So that's how I got my job as the welder at t.m.l Frontier Chainsaws in 1979, April.
One interesting thing about this entire video, part of the point of it, is at one point in time, that same fellow Matt Berg once told Father that John Campbell was known. How did he say that?
What? Now what?
When Matt was telling you about where you were known, but you weren't known in Toronto.
He said in Exeter, he said, everybody knows John Campbell in Exeter. After I had roughed up a guy at work, and he didn't think it was right that I would physically attack somebody. And he said, well, in Exeter, everybody knows John Campbell, but in Toronto, nobody knows you down there. So you just can't get away with what you're trying to do. You just got to be nice to people.
Well, he still has a habit of sometimes not being nice to people, giving them a hard time. But at least now, when poor old Matt Berg comes around, he can say, people in Toronto and all over the world maybe now will know who Johnny Campbell is. Do you think?
I suppose. What?
Talk.
What do you want to know? Okay, so after a couple weeks, I built the paint line and that, and had it working real good. And that, and he says, well, I make you the junior foreman and the welder. And you can work day and night. Do the day shift as the junior foreman and do the welding at night. So I said, well, the only way I'm going to do that is for more money. So they made me a red circle man because the CAW union hadn't moved in yet. So I worked during the day and welded most of the night. And that seemed to work well.
So tell me. You tell me all the time that I had to shut the up about all the stupid old Frontier chainsaws and whatnot, but whose fault is it that I think that way?
Well, I don't know, Bill. When you were a little guy, a guy by the name of Bill Britnell fixed you up a chainsaw, but he didn't put a chain on it because you were only 4 or 5 years old, and I used to start it up, and you used to go around with just a bar on it with no chain, banging and hitting everything and that, pretending you were cutting. And so from that day on, you seem to have a real interest in chainsaws and that. Because Bill Britnell built you one at work and give it to you to play with.
Well, it's a fact. And at one point in time, you were kind of the go-to guy in the area for all the Frontier and Pioneer chainsaw stuff.
Yes, I got a dealership. When they were going to close up and move out, they made me a Pioneer, Poolin, Frontier, everything, a dealership. So they give me a dealership and that, because to fix stuff for all the employees and everything else. And so I was the Poolin weed eater and Frontier and all that chainsaw dealer until 2004. Then I moved up north.
Yeah, it was a pretty near everything I've ever done or know with all the chainsaws and stuff. I learned from you over the years, especially back when you were smart.
I suppose. What are you laughing at, Lloyd?
But anyway, this will be our first little installment of, I think I'm going to call this Tales of Trail, and we'll come over and have a little chat with Johnny Campbell. When it comes right down to it, if there's anybody who's going to be interesting to listen to, he's the one. He could start stories now, and most of us would all be dead by the time he even got halfway through. Wouldn't you say?
I suppose.
I suppose.
I had an interesting time.
You had a fulfilled, interesting life.
Yeah, it was a good place to work. Frontier, Poolin, Pioneer, out of Peterborough, Markham. Closed up Markham plant, closed up Peterborough, moved everything to Huron Park.
Yeah, I think in a later installment we'll go over the tales of what all went on and how it all went, closing up the Pioneer plant and closing up the Poolin plant and all that. But for now, say goodbye to Johnny Campbell. Like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see him again shortly.